Hi, and welcome to Wisdom of the Mystics. Hi, Reverend Kathy.
Hey,
And
Laura.
hi, everybody. Hello, and welcome to you if you're joining us now live for Wisdom of the Mystics here on New Thought Media Network. My name is Laura Tupper, and I'm a practitioner with Center for Spiritual Living and, of course, Science of Mind and Spirit. And I am so excited to be here right now on New Thought Media Network, this wonderful global focus ministry that is here every day, bringing programs and broadcasts and education and entertainment to bring us to that place of knowing the truth of who we are through these spiritual practices that we love. And today, I'm just really excited also to be here with Reverend Kathy Mastroianni from the Science of Mind Archives. So I'm going to pass this on to Reverend Kathy. Great to be with you right now.
You too, Laura. I always love coming together for our Wisdom of the Mystics show. So we have such a good time, and we learn just amazing things about these mystics of new thought that have touched and transformed so many lives. So as Laura said, I'm Reverend Kathy Mastroianni. I'm Executive Director of the Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation. And we're coming together with New Thought Media Network to provide this wisdom, because the archives is truly the go-to spot, sciencemindarchives.com. Hi, Roxanne. We're here to preserve and protect and present science of mind wisdom and philosophy and history for the world. And it's my great honor to introduce our guest. So we have a super guest who presents their mystic. And our super guest today is Reverend Dr. Lloyd Tupper. And I've had the honor of knowing him for about the 8 years that I've been here at the archives. And he's just such a delight, and he's such a wealth of wisdom. He's been learning and teaching spiritual principles to practitioners, ministers, and students for over 40 years. He's a captivating teacher with the unique ability to invoke deep, transformative understanding of the promises of an abundant life of health, wealth, love, and happiness. He really is an expert on also Judge Thomas Troward, but today he's going to present a very, very special mystic, which is Vetura Papke, who was Ernest Holmes' personal practitioner. And Vetura was actually, Dr. Lloyd's practitioner. And so without further ado, a joy and honor to welcome Dr. Lloyd Tupper to our show. So welcome.
Thank you. It's a wonderful thing to be.
Welcome.
I'm very happy to be here. And I've traveled thousands of miles to get back home, so I could be here. So my voice is a little raspy, but I'll try to compensate for it.
Oh, we're so grateful. No, thank you. And we're grateful for your dedication and especially your excitement and enthusiasm to present this very special person to us. And so our first I love what we do because we really learned about these mystics, who they were as people. And so how would you describe Vetura Papke as a person? Who was she? What was she like in life?
Well, if I'm entirely honest with you, and since as a practitioner and a minister that I can see, I will be entirely honest with you. Vetura to me was every person's fantasy of the perfect grandmama.
Aw, aw.
She was the most loving, brilliant mind that I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. And yet at the same time, she was the warmest and most witty, down to earth, but absolutely flawlessly, principally oriented person in this philosophy that I think I've had the pleasure of meeting.
Wow.
I considered her not only my practitioner, but a very warm and dear and loving presence of what I would have liked had my grandma lived beyond my 6th birthday. I was able to recapture in meeting Vetura in 1968. And she was in her mature years when I met her. And she lived many years after that, but not as many as I would like. Now I speak with her in a realm of spiritual communication that probably is my own personal view of how that works. I don't get audible answers from her all the time, but I do get a door bang and sometimes a pull on my ear or a big hug. So I know her presence is with us today.
Oh, that's wonderful. And how did you, because she was Ernest Holmes' practitioner after Hazel passed.
That is true. That is true. Well, I say that is true, not that I was there when she was practicing for Ernest, and Hazel was also practicing for Ernest, but he wanted a professional practitioner within the scope of what Unity was doing, because Vetura, like Raymond Charles Barker, the former minister of our New York church, went through training at Unity School of Practical Christianity before she became involved with Ernest Holmes in Los Angeles. So she had that unity, that very sweet orientation of the Jesus teachings, which Unity is, of course, very famous for, along with Mary Baker Eddy. And so when she came over to Los Angeles and agreed to come into religious science and become a licensed practitioner with religious science and eventually a doctorate of religious science, it was a big move for her. And she had been living in New York. And then when Raymond graduated from Unity in 1939, it was not that far behind him that she came from Unity also over to religious science. And that was kind of the migration that she followed. And of course, Hazel, being Ernest's wife, was treating him both as a practitioner and I'm sure as a beloved wife. But when Vetura came in, Ernest definitely felt that her training, her background, and just her essence. I mean, anybody that met Vetura wanted to give Vetura a hug and feel the Shakti that was around her, within her, about her, before her, behind her, above her, and below her. She was the epitome of a mystic in a human experience, meaning that she was human in a human body when I met her, but you always knew that she was in and out of an aura of mysticism about how she spoke. It was never dogmatic. It was never overbearing, and it was never talking down to you as though you weren't able to reach the level or comprehend the mystical inclination that she just automatically had evolved into, so that you knew you were in the presence of a very, very holy being. And I can speak to that with some authority because I've had, like Vetura, I involved myself with other disciplines before I came into religious science. I was born a Catholic. I went to Catholic school, and then I only lived 6 miles from the Mother Church of Christian Science in Boston, where Mary Baker Eddy, of course, was established. And so my mother, who was 95% deaf, although she was a devout Catholic, went to Mass every morning, she read all the materials of the New Thought people, including Mary Baker Eddy. And because of that, she raised me with what I would call a very liberal Catholic background, but a very strict metaphysical background. And so when I met Vetura, it was just like meeting my mother all over again, because she had trained very similarly in the early days of our movement back in 1927, when we officially founded religious science. And that may be off a few years too, because I know the textbook was issued in 1927. So there was some things going on during that period, but that was before my time. I wasn't born till 1939, so I was a puppy when I met Vetura. I don't know if I answered that question, but I get into it, so you have to hold
It's
me
wonderful.
back. But that's the kind of person she was. And when she was in the Institute in Los Angeles, which was part of the configuration of Founders Church in Los Angeles, that was founded and built by Ernest and Dr. William Hornaday, she had an office in the Institute, which was directly next to Founders Church. And when you went in that Institute, you could feel whether or not she was in her office. That's how it felt for me. So I moved from where I lived, and I came over to Los Angeles. I got an apartment that she told me Norma Talmadge had lived in, who was before my time, but there was a building a block away named the Norma Talmadge Apartments, and I got the ground floor apartment of the former Norma Talmadge, whom I didn't know at all, but Vetura did. So I was a block away from the Institute. I was living in Norma Talmadge's apartment, and I had Vetura Papke as my dear friend and practitioner. Wow. And that's the way it was. She was a loving, caring, wonderful being. And it was my privilege to go visit her once a week on Wednesday, and we would have our session. Then we would go to I Magnin to the ladies', I guess it was tea room, and have dinner. And then we would go to the Wednesday night healing service at Founders Church. And then she'd drive home and I'd walk a block, and I thought I'd been to heaven and back for that fabulous experience of her. And I'll tell you more about her if you want, how it was to sit with her. I mean, she had a very small office in the Institute on the second floor. And as I said, you could tell when you walked into the Institute if she was there. It was like, now I may have been, I was a newbie then, and I was totally enraptured by religious science, that I felt like I had found my path finally. And as I said earlier, and I got sidetracked a little. I had gone into the Mother Church in Boston. I had gone to hear some Buddhist speaking in Boston. I went to a few Indian Hindu teachers, very well known at that time. Eventually, I got Shaktipat from Baba Muktananda, a very prominent founder of Siddha Yoga, but nothing affected me quite like Vetura Papke.
So I'd like to. I don't mean to interrupt you because I know you have so much to say, and I just want there's something I want to ask you.
I need to be interrupted, Laura.
Okay, I have permission. Great. This is so interesting, and there are a few questions that are on my mind. I'm just going to do one at a time because it will be easier. As a practitioner, because I mean, there are people watching here right now. Welcome, everybody. If you're watching, you're here with Dr. Lloyd and Reverend Kathy and myself, and we're talking about Dr. Vetura Papke. I didn't realize she was a doctor.
Yes.
There's a question I have for you, maybe on behalf of those that are watching as well, if there are practitioners watching. What was it about her as a religious science practitioner that elevated her to the degree where Ernest Holmes chose her as his personal prayer partner or practitioner? How can we as practitioners learn from her in that way if there was something about her that she was putting into practice as a practitioner?
Well, she was in charge of all the practitioners at that time that were in that vicinity, and she began having a luncheon for them, 500 of them, in the basement of Founders Church once a month.
500
practitioners would come in from all over Los Angeles, and some people like myself which I have done. I didn't do it at the time because I wasn't a practitioner and I couldn't have attended that luncheon. But she began the formal training of people that were going to become a practitioner, presumably only, and were not planning to go on to the ministry, such as I did. But a lot of the ministers who came into the movement, many of them, like Episcopalian priests, many Methodist ministers like Bill Hornaday, and all the other, I mean, we got a gamut of all kinds of persuasions, if you will, in doctrine of theologies coming over from other branches, because they, like myself, even though at the time I had my formal education yet, I had taken both the 30-week extension course while I lived in Arizona in Sedona. And then I had taken, when I got to Vetura, I took the first year course over again at the Institute, because Vetura felt that it was one thing to get an extension course every week, which was, I think, as good as anything I could have ever gotten, because it demanded so much of you at 30 weeks. And you had like at least 30 hours every week to have to study, and then take the test that week and then mail it back to Dr. Reginald Armour, who was in charge of the extension course at that time. But what Vetura insisted on was that even though we had had all these various backgrounds, if we were coming into religious science, then religious science was the thing that she was going to be the expert on. And so when you would walk into her office, she'd have the textbook on this very small desk, because the room was very small. It was only large enough for her to be behind the desk and for a chair to be in front of the desk, so you couldn't escape. Like if she asked you something, there was the book on the desk, with all these like pink markers in the science of mind. So if you were saying something, she could say, well, as it says on page 107, third paragraph, the issue you're talking about is discussed and taught, Lloyd, by Ernest, and you should go home and you should read it. Or
Right.
she'd read it. Or she'd begin her sessions, at least with me, well, how have you been? And in the beginning, I made the mistake of telling her because I had just gone through a terrible, terrible misfortune with a very powerful industrialist, so to speak, a very wealthy man, and he was the greatest teacher in the world for me because he really trimmed my feathers and taught me a lot of things that I wanted at the time when I met Vetura to forget. But anyhow, I'd go into my little song and dance and I'd say, well, I'm not feeling very good about this because, this person and I had started a business together and he was, we got into a legal misunderstanding. I'm going to be a real religious scientist now and say it was most unpleasant. And so I was very young at the time and somewhat naive, and I'm still somewhat naive, but I tell Vetura my tale of woes. This was when I first started seeing her. I'd take probably 20 minutes and I'd say he's doing this and his lawyers are doing that and it's causing me to lose this, da 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 da. And she would sit there regally coiffed beyond belief. I mean, you'd think she had just come from my Magnan's hair salon. She loved to wear beautiful jewelry because some of her clients were very wealthy and very famous actors and well, you don't say actresses anymore, but at the time you did. Now it's just actor. And they would give her jewelry and lovely gifts. And she dressed flawlessly. She looked like she was on a set of a movie. And so there she would be sitting like the grandmother image, beautiful white hair, her glasses, her beautiful diamonds, and not vulgar by any stretch of the imagination. But, if somebody's wearing a 10-carat diamond, you notice it. And of course, I did. And so when I would finish, sort of come in for a landing, she'd look at me and she'd say, Lloyd, give me your hand, darling. So I put my hand on her desk, somewhat hesitantly, because she put that hand with all those big diamonds right on my hand. And she'd say, now, darling, you're finished? And I'd say, yeah, I'm finished. That's it. I'm unloading, but I'm finished. I'm empty. And she'd say, that's wonderful. Now, would you like to know what God thinks of his beloved son? Mm-hmm. And I'd say, yes. Mm-hmm. And then she'd start. Right. And in this mystical voice, she'd tell me that I was made in God's image, that whatever mistakes I thought I made, because in religious science, Ernest says there are no mistakes. Mm-hmm. These are learning experiences. And how wonderful that I was willing to learn these lessons and to let go of thinking I needed to be perfect, and that the fact that I had gotten into this terrible situation with this multimillionaire who was just beating me to a pulp, that was all going to make me the most wonderful practitioner and sensitive to other people. And he was giving me an education in life that I couldn't go out and buy. And how incredibly wonderful it would be if I was to decide to go into the ministry, the stories I would have, and etc. Well, I didn't walk home. I flew home. I just literally flew back the 1 block to my apartment, and I was her last client for the day. And as I said, we'd go out to dinner, and then we'd go to the healing service on Wednesday night at Founders, and both sit there and cry when Bill Hornaday would start crying, to a packed house. I mean, 1,500 people on a Wednesday night healing service. I mean, it was like I was transcended almost. You know, I felt like I got into her aura of mystical awareness and mystical healing energy and truth. She'd say, "Now, Lloyd, do you want to know the truth about what you said?" And she'd remember everything I had said.
Wow.
And she would counter everything I had said by making a reference in the textbook from the things I had said the week before, because she had them all marked in the textbook. So there was no escaping with her. She was deliberate, but she was lovingly personal. She was brilliant. She was articulate, and she was absolute. And that's what I needed at the time. And I mean, I thought and had thought much later, of course, over these many years, what a blessing I had and what an advantage I had been given. Because as she said, and Ernest says, there are no accidents. Everything happens to us for a purpose and a reason. And she took the time to explain to me what the purpose of what I was going through, that living hell, in like saying, you won't ever have to go there, Lloyd, because all these experiences have given you a taste of what it's like. So you'll just be living in a heavenly experience all your life if you just let them go and let God enter. Right. Because God is seeking his beloved Son, in whom, by the way, Lloyd, he is well pleased. So there was no argument. I couldn't argue. I hardly could talk after she talked. And of course, then she'd give me a treatment angelically. I mean, it was like an angel from heaven. And there was no, I couldn't intellectually challenge her, because before I spoke, she knew pretty much what I was going to say. So that, as I said, when I left her office, I felt like, had I been a Hindu, I had just swam in the Ganges River in India, and I had been bathed and washed clean. And I used to go back to my apartment and I think, well, it can't be all wrong. I can't be all that bad, because Vetura says that God, thinks of me as his beloved Son. So then I would go out, and I got into a different representation for a business. At that time, it was Humble Oil in Houston. And what I would do is they had followed some work that I had done for this gentleman who owned this large company, in my success ability to get them accepted into areas where aesthetically their product, their building, was thought to be very undesirable. But by calling on me, and me calling on Vetura, and Vetura and I calling on Ernest, I was able to go into towns all over the Southwest and the Northwest and represent Humble Oil, now Exxon, and through modifications and things that I would suggest, they would modify their building and they would get accepted. And Vetura is totally responsible for my making back all the money I had lost previously, and she did it within a year.
Wow.
I'm going to take a drink.
This is incredible. It's such a wonderful learning and conversation. And thank you so much for sharing your
I got
life and
there. Am I
Vetura.
through? Am I over?
No, I think
You've got
Reverend
some more
Kathy has a
questions
question
for
for
me.
you.
I hope I didn't tell you too much information,
You're
but
here now.
it's a big spot in my heart for her.
It's
Okay, what's the
wonderful.
next question?
Do you have one
You have
more, or
another
do you want me to
question?
go next?
Yes. How is her teaching? I mean, I'm really interested in maybe you could go back a little bit into her where she came from. It sounds like, where did this person land from? What was her inspiration to be a practitioner? And then from that, what would you say if you were to take her teachings nowadays, how we could practically take something from those teachings and use them for our own lives? So it's two questions there.
Okay.
But just
Well,
where did she
first,
come from?
she came from New York, from as far back as I at the time knew. And I knew of one thing that I'll just say she was affiliated with the Rockettes at Radio City Theater in New York. And I never had the nerve to ask her if she was a Rockette, but I could tell you she gave me every indication that she had a lot to do with the Rockettes.
Wow.
Before she went, as she had heard about Unity and decided that she would study with Unity, which was in Lee Summit, Missouri. And at the time, I really didn't know her to the extent that I felt I could pry. I mean, she was most open with me when we would go to dinner, and we would be talking over dinner, and she'd ask about my past more than I had told her, like in our session. And then she would talk about what it was like to live in New York and to be on Broadway. And also, I got the impression that at some time she had a very exciting and wonderful life in the arts, in theater. But the only thing she ever said that gave me the indication that she was could have been a Rockette was that she was very involved with the Rockettes without saying, and I was one of them. But she
Okay.
certainly led me to believe that she hung out with them. So that's the best way I can describe it. And that her training was because of her love of Jesus, and that she wanted to go where Unity was, and she had heard that Charles Fillmore and Charles's wife, whose name is escaping me right now.
Myrtle.
Yes, right. She had heard of their healing work, and that
Okay.
she particularly wanted to go there and to meet the Fillmores and to Myrtle Fillmore and Charles, and to more or less investigate their healings. What was it they were doing? What was the basis of their healings? And how they were historically researching with other disciplines at the time how Jesus was able to do what Jesus did.
Mm-hmm.
So she not only looked into Alice and Mary Bailey, she looked into Emma Curtis Hopkins, who was at that time, I guess, the secretary to Mary Baker Eddy at Founders Church in Boston in Christian Science. So she had looked into a lot of those various disciplines when she decided she wanted to go into the healing arts. And so she decided to go to Unity to find out all that she could from the Fillmores. And then she had gotten word about this man called Ernest Holmes, who had been ordained a minister in divine science, which was up in Denver. And Ernest and Emmett Fox and the Fillmores and Irving Seal, just to name a few, were doing these transcontinental railroad crossings where they would start in New York or Boston, mostly, where Bitzer started, Robert Bitzer, and they would take a train all the way across the United States, and they would stop in all these major cities, and they would give a metaphysical lecture in a ballroom in a hotel. And that's how Ernest got started. That's how Emmett Fox got started. And then the Fillmores got started. Nora Brooks, who founded Divine Science, got started. They all kind of emanated out of Mary Baker Eddy originally in Boston. And then when that wasn't, I have to be careful how I say this now, when that didn't meet their particular needs, because it certainly met the needs of a lot of various practitioners in Christian Science. And a lot of them, like Joseph Murphy, Emma Curtis Hopkins, Nora Brooks, Ernest Holmes, Emmett Fox, they all were involved with that metaphysical center in Boston where Robert Bitzer was, the first ordained minister that started another church outside of the main church in Los Angeles. He had the Sunset Boulevard Church in Hollywood. All these people came out west on trains and stopped in all these metropolitan cities and gave metaphysical lectures, and they wrote pamphlets or booklets, and they sold them, and that's how they supported themselves. And that's how Ernest Holmes ended up in Los Angeles or Venice, California. And Vetura felt like that's how she was going to come out west. And so she started in Kansas City or Lee's Summit, Missouri. And she went to many of those various churches where people were teaching, metaphysical teaching, some of them Christian Science, some of them divine science, and eventually Ernest started religious science. And so when she heard of religious science and divine science and already had experienced Christian Science, she thought that was what she had found the golden apple, I guess. And so
she'd come home.
Did I get sidetracked or did I answer your question?
Well, I think both.
But I want you to know the woman was incredibly worldly. She wasn't a Pollyanna, although I know I've done research on Pollyanna. She was a very brave woman. You should be told you're very Pollyannish. But Vetura wasn't very Pollyannish. She was a no-nonsense, absolute letter of the law type teacher. And she quoted it, all found everything she had experienced with all these other disciplines in the Science of Mind textbook. And that's the only book she had on her desk. And the only book she ever referred me to. So what was the second question?
Well, I think you've actually answered that, because the second part of the question was how can we take, what's relevant right now today from her? What pieces can we take and glean from this, either as a practitioner or not as not as a qualified practitioner? We're all practitioners. And I think you've answered that. Is that she had that book, and that book was her life, and she lived by every word in that book as far as her treatment of herself and others was concerned.
A vast practice of practically all the ministers at that time that had converted and come into religious science. They all saw her. Ernest saw her. himself. I mean, he'd go to her office because he wanted to be reminded of the vast knowledge that she had gained from going to all these different various places. Once she felt she got the call to become a practitioner of metaphysical studies, especially because at the time she was primarily influenced by the healings of Jesus the Christ.
Right. So it was her eclectic view that Ernest Holmes and other ministers would have been attracted to.
And that's why Ernest could sit with her and talk about the textbook and all the teachings as we have in the textbook, that whole section on Jesus the Christ, because she was very familiar with it. She had met people like the Fillmores who were using the principles that they espouse in the teachings that they use as to how Jesus was able to do what he did. And then, of course, Ernest elaborated on it, on how Jesus and all the other seers and mystics down through the ages were able to do what they had done and were doing. And little did he know, or maybe he did know, because he passed over a couple of years before I arrived at the Institute, that Vetura had learned about them, and they were able to have like a conversation of all the commitments that Ernest was making and had written into the textbook. She absolutely knew they were all possible and they were factual. She had that information. She was something else.
She sounds amazing. And we're grateful. Yeah, thank you. And so I feel like I might know the answer to this question. I'd love to hear your answer to this one. But what was the spiritual practice that Vetura was known for? And maybe...
well, I did know a little bit about that, because I would ask her questions. Once I got, once she became my grandmama, and she was always calling me, the sweetest names, and it would embarrass me in front of people. She'd say, "This is God's beloved son, Lloyd," something like that.
So
And I'd
sweet.
go, "Oh,
well, that's awesome."
Anyhow, she tell me the question again. I get excited when I think about it. I feel her spirits around here somewhere today.
Yeah, what was the spiritual practice that Vetura was known for?
Practice. Okay. I asked her what she did, and she said she spent at least an hour in the morning, every morning, before she got dressed and coiffed to come to work, doing her reading. She read the textbook every day. She read the Science of Mind magazine every day. She read Creative Thought. Creative Thought, which was at that time RSI, Religious Science International, before they merged with us, or we merged with them. She read Daily Word by Unity.
Wow. Nice.
She read a Hindu book. I'm not too familiar with whether it was the Bhagavad Gita or something, but she did have a Hindu influence that she had experienced, a Hindu teacher, and she thought a lot of Buddhism and Hinduism showed up in our textbook. She had several clients that were recovering alcoholics, so she was very versed in the 12-step program. A couple of them referred to her in books they had written, fairly well-known recovering alcoholics who had found religious science and had a desire not to drink. And when they found religious science, they found their answers as to why they didn't have to drink. This is their testimony that they gave. So so she was very familiar with the 12-step programs, whether they were, and she told me this, whether they were 12 steps on Sex Anonymous or Drug Anonymous or Alcohol Anonymous, and she'd go down the whole list. She knew all of that information, and she studied it. If there were any new books out that on ways or techniques that were complementary with our principles, she would read something every day besides the textbook, and that's what kept her abreast. But she also said that her students taught her, and her patients. Like I was a patient of hers. She didn't teach me educationally wise. I was taking courses at the Institute, but she would integrate what I was learning, the letter of the law, with the spirit of the law. And she would make me go and read things. If I said something, she'd say, well, I was reading in chapter such and such in the textbook today about your desire to do this or not to do that or whatever. And I had a desire at the time to stop drinking because I was using alcohol to assuage the pain, psychic pain I was going through. And she said, well, Lloyd, you're only 2 blocks from this huge, I think it was a Methodist church on Wilshire Boulevard called Wilshire Methodist, and they had a basement that would seat 3,000. And she said, there's a meeting there on Monday nights. Why don't you go there? I've been to it with some of my clients, and I think you'll love it. And I walked into that basement, and there were 3,000 recovered alcoholics or recovering alcoholics. And I didn't think I was a recovering alcoholic. I just had a desire not to drink. And I was swooped up by those 3,000 people having the best time of their life. And I thought, my God, I want to be like them. And I didn't drink for 22 years from that one meeting that she sent me to.
Wow.
I mean, so that was her discipline. And if I asked her to go to a meeting, she would stay late and go to a meeting with me. She was that kind of person. So she was open at the top, like we say, like Ernest says in the textbook. If you're still quoting him, 20 years after he's not around here anymore, you should be mixing it up with more contemporary things. But what Vetura felt at the time, and I feel the same way, I can always hear newer and more articulate, maybe contemporary, that's a better word, writings about issues that Ernest was dealing with back in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, up to 60 when he passed over, I think 69 or whenever it was, 72, whatever it was. He too felt that we had to keep abreast, and that's what she did. She read a lot of the literature from these various affiliated kind of spiritual arms that were not necessarily religious scientists, but also a recognition of the principles that we teach. But when you went to see her, there was only one book, and that was the Science of Mind textbook on her desk with about 24 or 35 what we call stickies, now they were just pieces of paper. She had a stack of them that were printed for her, and she'd just peel one off and peel one off and peel one off, and she'd write Lloyd, Bill, Jane, Laura, Kathy, whatever, and she would have read it during the week so that when I would meet with her or they would meet with her, she had already a prescription identified within the textbook that applied to the things I had said the week before.
Oh, this is incredible.
Oh, she
I'm
was.
I'm so inspired by everything that you're saying, Reverend Kathy. It's just amazing the way she would have. It was like she was creating her own mind cure for individuals, and really going through the book with a fine tooth comb. But she knew it.
Well,
It amazed me that she's a practitioner and a doctor. She skipped ministering because she was ministering anyway.
she told me that she never wanted to become a minister. I asked her because I said I wanted to become a minister, which I eventually did, obviously. But I said to her, why not? And she said, I don't want to have to deal with the things ministers have to deal with,
Right.
which is primarily running a church. And she said, Lloyd, you may go on to becoming a minister, but you'll always be a practitioner.
Right.
So when people ask for me to be introduced, I always acknowledge, yes, I am a minister. I have a doctorate from religious science ministry, but I'm a practitioner.
Yes.
And my practice today is a practitioner.
Yes.
I left the pulpit after 4 churches to primarily to support practitioners like Vetura supported me, and I want to support them. And that's what she left me with. If you become a practitioner, believe me, you've got the essence of what we're all about. Now, that isn't to say that ministers don't have their place, because they certainly do. But I can tell you unqualifiably that if a minister is not a stellar practitioner, they'll never make it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that. I mean, I finally left because I had this huge church that I started in San Francisco, and we would fill it 1,000, 1,300 or whatever people on whatever Sunday. And I would stand at the doorway, and people would come through and they would say, you know, wonderful, or I loved your speech, or you inspired me, or whatever. I felt nothing. Nothing.
Right.
Nothing ever gave me what I gave Vetura and what Vetura gave me. And that is when you are a great practitioner, and I mean great by heart, by intellectualism, by practice, by devotion, by commitment. It's everything. And when you can change somebody's life by telling them the truth and setting them free, and you come from that absolute belief, there's nothing like it that makes your whole life worthwhile. So although I appreciate the 4 pulpits that I had, I realized I had to go back to being a practitioner in order to be fulfilled. That running a church was too much administration and too much, in a way, too much politics. And church has politics. You have to have it. You don't run a big, successful church without politics. You pray that the politics are spiritually based, but you know, it keeps you. You're very busy running a church. Me, I don't feel like I work. I mean, I have 4 to 5 clients a day, and I have them 7 days a week if I want them. And there is nothing I'd rather be doing, except when I'm planting bulbs in the fall, because I want my daffodils to come up, which, by the way, they're all over my house in my gardens now. They're coming up. But that's because I'm a practitioner, and I love what I do.
Yes.
And I love practitioners. So that must mean I love you, Laura. And I do love you, Kathy, even though you went on to become a minister. But
Well,
look, you're a minister of something very much like practitioners are trained in.
very true. Yeah, the archive is my
Yes,
ministry. So what a blessing.
definitely.
That's what I'm
And
so
I'm
inspired by you, Dr. Lloyd, is just your heart to love practitioners. And I've had the blessing to be in a practitioner session with you, and just I can feel that spirit and feel Vetura's spirit through you. And so we're
Well,
so grateful
I
that
do
you're
it
here
in
today.
honor of her memory. If
Yes.
someone said to me, how did you get to be, or how have you become so successful as a practitioner? I said, because I was personally trained by the best practitioner I've ever
right.
met in my life, bar none.
Absolutely.
So,
What a
So we're so
blessing. What a blessing. And we're so grateful. I'm so grateful that you're here to share. And if there are practitioners watching right now, then this is your video to watch and rewatch and to hear what Dr. Tupper is talking about. I know I'm going to rewatch it and to learn more because we pick things up again as we rewatch and listen to information. We pick up different things.
well,
And we
and Kathy is going to soon have available through the archives 12 tapes that Vetura recorded after I had been her client. And she did 12 monthly recordings. And I hope that those will be available for people to be able to listen to on your program. I know that people can listen to
wonderful.
other archive material, but they can hear her own voice. And
Oh, amazing.
anybody that doesn't get it, she's got a booklet out on joy, but the 12 lectures are just so sweet and so dear.
Oh,
And her
beautiful.
humor will come out when you hear it.
yes.
Well, if ever we get the link to that, maybe we can link it to this video. That would be wonderful if they're
Absolutely.
freely
Sure.
available.
I would, yes, definitely. We're in the
That
process
would be
of
great.
digitizing them to making them available. So it's,
You
again,
know,
wonderful.
Kathy, if you find out who might have the copyrights,
Mhm.
I would be happy to talk to them on your behalf
Okay.
to tell them that we would like to be able to have the permission to have people listen to them through the archives.
Thank you. We'll do that for sure. And
And
we're
you wouldn't be charging for that, would you?
probably not. And so that's something.
That'll be easy for me to do, because if I say we're not charging for them, but we do accept donations for them, then the person that owns the copyright, I don't think would have an argument at all, because if they are for sale, then that person is going to get a fee anyhow. If the person that from the field wants to listen and then go and buy one, well, you people should get a licensing agreement with them and have them available to sell.
Well, thank you. Let's have that conversation, because we're getting ready to wrap up here, and we're just so grateful for your time. And do you have a website or anything, or if people wanted to get in contact with you?
I do. I write a weekly blog, and it comes out every week. And if people want to go to my website, it's www.revlloyd.com. And they can get all the things I'm writing about contemporary things now. But they can get whatever I have out. And all the churches have my tapes, so they have them available. And I don't particularly want to be in selling tapes. I just want to be in talking truth.
Oh, thank you so much for being here, Dr. Lloyd. The hour has just whizzed by, and I can feel Vetura here as well. It has. And we've had.
I'm looking at my Rothschild Bank o'clock from Zurich, and it says it's exactly 4 o'clock.
There you go. And we've had wonderful people listening here, and thank you all for being here right now and joining us, and Dr. Lloyd Tupper for just sharing, and Vetura for being present in spirit and soul right now. And Reverend Kathy, it's just a joy to be here and on New Thought Media Network, where we show up all the time, every day with shows like this and broadcasts to educate and inspire us to use these teachings for our lives. They're really powerful teachings, powerful tools that we can use to improve our lives and to also get closer to knowing that truth that Dr. Lloyd talks about, the truth of who we are, the wisdom and the light. And I'm going to put the New Thought Media Network link here, the donate button, if you love this network, which I know many of you do. And you know that God is our source. And so we use this principle of tithing, the law of reciprocity, as we donate and tithe, including back into this wonderful network, New Thought Media Network, that's doing amazing things globally. So thank you for being here. And Reverend Kathy, if you have a few words to share, please do right now.
Just grateful for you, Laura, grateful for you, Dr. Lloyd, and the Science Mind Archives is here for everyone. So I do encourage people to go to sciencemindarchives.com, because that's where you'll find these tapes when we digitize them. And it's a great way to support the archives as well. So just so grateful for everyone for your dedication to seeking the truth and discovering it within. And we will see you in a couple weeks. We're going to have our friend Reverend Jody Stevenson, and she's going to present Laos 2, if I'm saying that correctly. And she is just so passionate about this teacher. So on the 4th Tuesday on the 26th, we'll see her again. So thank you so much for joining us. We're very grateful.
Thank you, Dr.
God bless.
God bless. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.